Well, the first time I met Prabhupada, I was living in Hawaii, and I was a hippie, and I was living out on the beach, meditating, reading the Bhagavad-gita, trying to understand the meaning of life. And as I was sitting there one day, meditating, a flyer flew by, and it said, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami speaking at Sunset Point on the Bhagavad-gita. So I thought, this is amazing. I can hear an actual Indian Swami talk to me about the Bhagavad-gita, the book I'd been studying for like 2 years. And since I was 14, I was 16 at the time. And so I went there to the lecture, and Prabhupada sat there and he was talking, and he was sitting on just a slightly raised platform covered with a beautiful Indian rug. And there was only like maybe 5 or 6 devotees. I mean, it was very, very small. This was in 1969. And he finished talking and asked for questions. And I said, Swamiji, I've been reading the Bhagavad-gita, and I handed him mine. And I said, is this one okay? Because a lot of the content of the lecture was how you must read a bona fide Bhagavad-gita from a bona fide spiritual master, etc. So I handed him my book, and I said, is this one okay? And he said, well, come back to the temple and we'll talk. So I got in the back of this truck, and I remember sitting in the back of the truck. It was an open flatbed type truck with a couple of other people and devotees, and he was sitting in the front with a couple of other people. And I was watching his head the whole time because it was bobbing, and it was this beautiful bald head. And as we walked up the stairs to the temple, he said, come on in and we'll talk. So I went into the room, and he started talking to me about the Bhagavad-gita. And I started talking to him about LSD, which I was very much into at the time, and how I had seen Krishna on LSD. And he said, well, you don't need to take LSD because you can see Krishna because Krishna loves you and shows favor upon you. And then Govinda Dasi was there at the time, and she brought in a tray of sugar cane. Prabhupada said, would you share the sugar cane with me? And at the time I said, no, I don't eat sugar, because I was against any kind of sugar eating. And he said, this is very natural. It just grows on the side of the road, you know. It's very natural. He was reading my mind. He knew exactly where I was coming from. And he showed me how to eat it. So we sat there and we ate sugar cane together, and I was chewing the pieces and he was chewing the pieces. We were putting our chewed pieces onto the same plate. I mean, in retrospect, it's amazing because it was this amazingly casual thing. And he played me a tape of a CD, not a CD, of a record that he had done, and showed me some other books and said, I'd like you to stay here at the temple. And at the time I said, well, but he told me I would have to stop taking LSD. So I said, I can't do that. I said, I'm getting so much spiritual insight from taking LSD. So he said, well, I hope that you will reconsider. And that was the first time I met him. It was pretty wonderful. I went back to the forest to meditate some more. And very shortly after that, I had the realization that the only way I could ever get spiritual enlightenment was to find him. So I called around, because I didn't even know there was a Hare Krishna movement. There was no connection. It was like this Swami. And I found out that he was in Los Angeles. So I went back to Los Angeles, and he was coming like in 2 weeks. And when I saw him there, I was dressed in a sari and everything. And he looked at me and he said, I remember you from Hawaii. And he said he was very glad I had come. And said, come back to my apartment and we'll talk. So he had an apartment. This was when the temple in Los Angeles was not where it is now. It was on La Cienega, I think. And it was an old church. So I went back to his apartment and we talked, and he said to me, now you understand the difference between your Bhagavad-gita and my Bhagavad-gita? It was very cute. And in Amritsar, he was doing everything as far as personal habits, because in India, he said, everyone will watch all of your habits. Never touch your food with your left hand. So he taught us how to peel a banana without touching it with our left hand. He taught us how to drink water from a glass without touching it to our lips. So he was very particular about our habits because he said, everybody will be watching and making sure that I've taught you well. And Jamuna and I, in Amritsar, decided, actually Prabhupada asked us to sing, lead kirtan once. And we were singing not just Hare Krishna, a lot of varieties of prayers. And somebody in the audience, when we were finished, criticized our Sanskrit pronunciation. And Prabhupada fired back at them, said, "You do not have 1/10 of the devotion of these women. How dare you criticize their Sanskrit?" He was very, very angry. He had such a passionate personality. And so he was very protective all the time when we were in Amritsar. We went to the Golden Temple, which is the most holy temple for the Sikhs. And they showed us around one of the, it's not pujaris for them, but one of the temple people there showed us around the temple. And Prabhupada was very impressed. He really liked it. They had a huge chapati maker, like an upside down wok, that there was about 10 men around, big long spatulas flipping chapatis, and they were feeding people, poor people, and he was very impressed by that. And we went in and we went to the inner sanctum of the Golden Temple, and we walked all around. And at the end, when we walked out, there was a book that they asked Prabhupada to sign. And they said, "Would you sign our book, Swamiji?" And he said yes, and he signed his book. And under the book, in the book there was a place that said, "What are your impressions of the temple?" And Prabhupada said, "Very spiritual." And he made sure that we all heard what he was saying, because he wrote it and told us at the same time. And then under religion, it was very cute because he wrote Krishnite. And it was very funny. Not Hindu, Krishnite. And so that was a wonderful experience in Amritsar. I remember one time in New Delhi, somebody said, Maya, he was talking about Maya, and he said, "Maya, everything, this whole world is just an illusion." And Prabhupada jumped down his throat and said, "How dare you call it an illusion?" He said, "It is beautiful." He said, "The mountains are beautiful, the oceans are beautiful, the rivers, the sky, the trees, everything. This is a beautiful world." He said, "But what it is it's temporary. And it's just a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So if you see the beauty of this world, you'll see how beautiful the spiritual world is. 1,000,000 times more beautiful." But he said, it's like if you were to paint a painting and bring it to me and say, "Srila Prabhupada, look at this painting I have done for you." And I would look at it and say, "It's an illusion." He said, "It would hurt your feelings. So I find it very offensive that you call this world an illusion." I remember another time Prabhupada said, this was in Bombay, there was a Indian gentleman who came in, and we used to sit with Prabhupada a lot. The schedule would be that we would have after morning service, and when we were first in India, the Mangala Artik was in his room. So the little deities that we traveled with were just set up in his room, and we would go in his room, and he would sometimes do the service. And after Mangala Artik, he would talk to us on the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad-gita. And then after that, he would have darshan, which is people coming to visit him. And we did this everywhere, like in Amritsar, all throughout India, wherever we went, this would be the schedule. And in Bombay, this man came into him, and he said, he prostrated himself in front of him, and he said, "Prabhupada, Swamiji," he said, you will save me. You can enlighten me." And Prabhupada looked him squarely in the eye and said, "I cannot enlighten you. I can teach you how you can enlighten yourself, but you have to do the work yourself." So he was not one to say that, just by his association you would be enlightened. You had to work at it. It would take effort. In Surat, the whole town laid out the red carpet for Prabhupada. People would string saris across the buildings, from building to building, to shade the pathway when we would do Sankirtan. Everyone would hang out the windows and throw flowers and rice. And people would come up to us by the hundreds and giving us garlands, and they would pile up, so you'd have to start taking them off because there would be so many. And Prabhupada for hours tirelessly would see hundreds of people, and he'd pass out these little candies to them. Surat was really, really magical. Prabhupada used to speak tirelessly. We would go to various programs. Prabhupada, by that time, had known that because we talked a lot, he knew that I had memorized the Isopanishad and was able to sing it because I'd sung it for him before. So we went to this village outside of Surat once, and he asked me to sing the Isopanishad. So I stood up and I sang. I was very nervous. I mean, I was only like, at the time I was only 18 by that time. So I'm singing this, all the verses. I've memorized all of them and I'm singing them. And Prabhupada was always treating us like his children. So when I finished, he was beaming like a proud father. And he called me over and put my head in his lap. And he patted my back and rubbed my head. And he said he was so proud. And I mean, it was like one of those magical moments where I'll never forget it, because he was very warm, very affectionate. And Prabhupada, I talked the Pujari of Govindaji's temple, I talked him into giving Prabhupada a house on the temple grounds. So we cleaned this house, and Prabhupada came in, and he was very, very pleased. And one day, while this pandal was going on, I went into Prabhupada. This is a sweet story, because I said, Prabhupada, it's kite flying season. There's kites in the sky. I mean, the sky is just covered with kites. And he said, are you going to go fly kites today? I said, no, I wasn't thinking of it. And he goes, I used to fly kites when I was young with my sister. And he said, and her kite would always fly higher than mine. And he said it would make me so angry, because my sister's kite was always going to fly higher than mine. So he said, one day I decided I would cheat. And I got up on the roof and I started flying my kite from there. So my kite was flying higher than my sister's, Pishma. And then he says, but then she started chanting, Govinda, Govinda, help me. And her kite flew higher than mine. He said, so even in our childhood, we were always remembering Krishna. It was very sweet. Then he said, so you go fly kites today. And when he first arrived, I showed him the flyers that I had made up for the Pandal ceremony. And it said, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami is going to be at so-and-so Mandir Govinda, because the Pandal itself was behind Govindaji's temple, and in the back of the temple in an open lot area. And it said, Bhaktivedanta Swami and his foreign disciples. Prabhupada looked at the foreign disciples. He said, why did you say foreign disciples? I said, I thought it would be attracting people. And he goes, no, it should say American and European disciples. That is the attraction. And then he made one of the men redo the whole thing. And then he said, what can I expect? You're just an unintelligent woman. I walked out. I was crying. I was so upset because I'd worked so hard to put this thing together. Then I found out that Prabhupada said after I left, he said, I am very pleased with her, but a guru's business is to discipline. If I don't discipline, how will you ever learn? He said, disciple means discipline, so therefore I discipline. He was actually not mad at me. It was very nice. We were in New Delhi during the Bangladesh war. And so every night, Prabhupada would want to work and talk to us and have meetings and have darshan with different people, but we had to keep the lights out because they had blackouts that were mandatory, and you had to turn all the lights out. So Prabhupada was unhappy about that, and I decided that I should black out the windows. So I got black cloth and put it in the windows. And that night, I flipped on the lights as a surprise for him, to show him that we could have the lights on. And he said, oh, Kaushalya, you have put blackout in the windows. He said, that is first-class intelligence. And then he said, first-class intelligence is you see a need and you do it. no one tells you. He said, second-class intelligence is, I say to you, do this and that, and you do it excellently. That's second-class intelligence. He said, third-class intelligence is, I say, go do this or that, and you run out the door, and you come back and you say, what was I supposed to do? I went through this really difficult bout of illness. Then I came back, I went to Delhi and I got better, and we traveled some more, and I ended up back in Calcutta like maybe 2 years later or something with hepatitis. And I wasn't getting well. I was taking Ayurveda, and I wasn't getting well. And Prabhupada finally said to me, I remember I was explaining to him, because when he came back, he had been away, and then he came back and he said, you are not getting any better. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm taking Ayurveda. And he said, do not take Ayurveda. He said, Ayurveda is for preventative medicine. He said, you are now very sick. You should go to a regular doctor and take regular medicine. So he thought Ayurveda was preventative, not curative. And I mean, after all, he was a pharmacist prior to becoming a sannyasi. Another interesting time was when we were in Calcutta. Prabhupada showed us where he used to live, where his childhood home. And he talked a lot about his father, and how his father showed him how to do a Rath Yatra, and how he used to have small childhood Rath Yatra festivals. And his father, I think, was a very important influence to him. He really loved his father. He talked about him with a lot of reverence and love and respect. So that was wonderful, seeing where he grew up. I'd lived in India for almost 4 years, and I finally went back to America, partly because of my health and partly because of my husband. And it was a weird situation, because I had been so involved in Krishna consciousness in India, which is so different than Krishna consciousness in the United States, at least at that time. When I saw all of these people and heard these techniques like changing people up and wearing wigs and going to airports and doing all these things that I thought were very un-Krishna conscious, I was so frustrated and unhappy. I thought, let me get back to Prabhupada as quickly as I can. And so I went back to Bombay, walked into his room, and I said, Prabhupada, you wouldn't believe what they're doing in the United States. They're changing people up, and they're wearing wigs, and they're doing this, and they're doing that. And I'm like tattling on my, God brothers and God sisters. And he goes, are you perfect? And I said, no. And he said, well, then they are doing the best they can. They're trying. So don't criticize. Just stay here and cook for me. Don't worry about it. Once he said, the rules and regulations are because you have no self-control. We went to one engagement, and I can't recall exactly where it was, but it was a big, huge feast that this lady had prepared for us. And there were onions all throughout the vegetables. And it was delicious. It was vegetarian, but there was onions. So one of the devotees, I think it was one of the men, I can't remember which one, leaned over to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, there's onions in the vegetables. He whispers it. Prabhupada looked at him like he was, his eyes were on fire. He was so angry. He said, quiet, eat. He didn't want to offend her. He was very sweet. He said, it doesn't matter. Just eat. And then another time, they were serving us chocolate. And we all thought, oh, you're not supposed to eat chocolate because it's got caffeine in it. And Prabhupada said, eat it. He was like he said, just eat it. You can have ice cream. It doesn't matter. So he was casual in some ways and strict in other ways. But I think that his principle was he didn't want to offend our hosts more than being a stickler for the rules and regulations. And that was more of a concern to him, I think, than the fact that there was onions in the vegetables. He didn't care. And he ate it and complimented her on her cooking. So it was a great example. After Jaipur, Prabhupada, the Maharaja of Jaipur had decided to give us a property that was behind Govindaji's temple. And so Prabhupada didn't think, me being a woman, I could manage things on my own. So he left Devananda there to work with me, and another Indian brahmachari that I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, to make a long story short, they backed out on their offer, which is why we don't have a temple in Jaipur, but they were originally going to give us an actual old palace. And then they backed out on their offer after Prabhupada left. So we came back to Mayapur, and the rumor mill had been running hot and heavy that Devananda and I had had an affair. So I was very, very upset about it. And I wanted to just shave my head and live in an ashram. There was one of Prabhupada's godbrothers had an ashram just outside of Mayapur, and so I went into him and I said, Prabhupada, I can't take it. I just want to shave my head and live in the forest, and I don't want to have to, suffer all this criticism and all these rumors and stuff. And he said to me, why are you complaining? He said, look what I have to take. You think you have to take so much? He said, Kaushalya, you are looking for a calm sea, and you will not find it here. You will not find it here in this material world. You will only find it in Goloka Vrindavan with Krishna. And so he said, I would let you go and shave your head and live in the ashram, but I would worry about you. So you cannot go. You must stay with me. I said, fine, as long as I can stay with you. So that was that. And then another time in Jaipur, Malati at the time was cooking for him. And there's a lot of monkeys in and around the Jaipur temple, the black-faced monkeys. They're very rascally and they're very funny. So they kept coming and stealing food. And she went in, and we were sitting there. I was talking to Prabhupada, and Malati comes in all in a panic. The monkeys will not stop eating the food. They keep stealing your food, Srila Prabhupada. He said, I'll tell you what we do. We take a bow and arrow, we shoot one monkey, and hang it over the kitchen. And then it'll scare them all away. And everybody's like jaws dropped, because he's saying this very seriously. And then he laughs. He said, I'm just kidding. It was very funny. And he was always saying funny things like that.
Je anilo premadana koruna prachu